The Assimilation of Coffee in South Korea. For this group project, we'll be focusing on the assimilation of coffee in South Korea. The consumption of food and drink serves to both reinforce group membership and set groups apart. Thus, within this presentation, we'll look to highlight the importance of coffee in South Korea and its growing importance within Korean culture. For we as a group believe that the present trend of coffee shops in Korea is more than just beverage consumption, but rather a case of cultural propensity. Despite the evident influence of Western attitudes, and more specifically American attitudes towards coffee, we believe that coffee has become a staple of the Korean lifestyle, removed from Western ideals. We will thus look to show that coffee has become a distinct and unique part of Korean culture, and that the consumption of coffee is directly associated with membership of Korean society. Our project will thus be split into three parts. Part 1 will focus on the history and assimilation of coffee in South Korea over the years. Part 2 will then focus on the development and perception of coffee in Korea over the years, supported by statistical data analysis and interviews. And finally, Part 3 will conclude with an overview into how coffee is perceived in Korea in the present day. We hope you enjoy our project and thank you for watching. History of coffee in South Korea. Coffee was first introduced into South Korea in 1896 to the royal family and was subsequently enjoyed as an exotic beverage by a limited number of Koreans. Only the wealthy and those with contacts in the outside world could consume coffee. In 1902, the first coffee shop known as Tabang was opened in Korea by German native Antoinette Sontag. And during Japan's colonization of Korea, these tabangs, alongside coffee culture, offered vital meeting places for the ruling elites and artistic activities. Throughout the industrial period, tabang started to garner popularity amongst the masses, especially in downtown places such as Myeongdong, Cheongmoro, and Songkongdong. But it was not until the period of the Korean War from 1950 to 1953 that an increased number of Koreans came into contact with coffee, due to the availability of coffee in an instant powder format as part of the US military food rations. At the time, coffee received a mixed reception from the Korean public, as the taste of the beverage was not familiar to many of them. Then, throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the tabangs once again rose to prominence and started to flourish. Alongside being used as meeting places, music tabang started to gain popularity in support of the demands for expressions of freedom and uniqueness during the decades of repressive and authoritarian rule under the Park Chung-hee administration. In the 1980s then, South Koreans were also introduced to freshly brewed coffee on a wider scale, but the quality of these coffee beans was extremely poor. But the quality of coffee experienced an upsurge in the 1990s as global brand espresso cafes started doing business in South Korea, for example Starbucks. Also in the 1990s, with the increase in consumption practices and preferential lifestyles, predominantly of the upper class, Koreans sought out more extravagant cafes and coffee professionalism. Alongside this change, themed cafes also garnered popularity amongst the middle class, young professionals and college students. Consequently, in the 21st century, coffee has now become a staple of Korean culture and implemented itself in the nation's food system, nearly 100 years after its introduction into the country. Development and perception of coffee in South Korea. Development of coffee in Korea can be observed through the growth of the coffee market in years. Sales at coffee shops have increased significantly in recent years, from $300 million in 2007 to $4.3 billion in 2018. The import of coffee has also been increasing as a result of fast growth within the coffee market. For example, imports of stir-fried coffee have been growing about 13% each year since 2012. Current perception of coffee in South Korea. Raul Moretti, assistant professor of the Department of Global Business, conducted a study that revealed that South Korea had their first significant coffee consumption in the 20th century, and by 1980, specifically, instant and canned coffees became the standard. Towards the end of the 20th century, franchises such as Starbucks and Cafe Bene became omnipresent within Korean society. Back in 2015, South Korea consumed an average of 2.3 kilograms of coffee a year per capita. From the introduction of coffee up to the present times, coffee shops have developed a vast number of different items, including things such as pastries, sandwiches, desserts, non-coffee beverages, and unique items. Some of those items can only be found in South Korea, for example, beverages like kurkuma latte, as well as the development of instant coffee for the convenience of the consumers and coffee shop takeout system development for the easy access, such as drive-through. Currently, coffee shops developed to provide coffee as a commodity for consumers to consume in or outside the store. Furthermore, the component of coffee consumption can be associated with cultural context. In other words, coffee can bind a group of people through the same activity, creating and affirming a group identity. Coffee itself has been set up as part of Korean culture and is extremely important for our social relationships, said Kim Sok-chun. In South Korea, coffee became the social lubricant that mediates the social interactions. The assimilation of coffee in South Korea brought a unique style of coffee shop environment designed around music, art, cartoon characters, or unique themes decided by the hosts of coffee shops. Coffee is deeply interconnected with socializing. Most coffee shops retain a reputation of social meeting places where people gather casually to enjoy some coffee over a casual conversation. Coffee shops are also associated with studying, relaxation, or as a getaway place. The coffee smell creates a very relaxing atmosphere, perfect to go have a talk with my friends, said Bang Dre. Some of the words associated with coffee are relaxing, smell, nice music, reading book, desserts, and more. Those words are a perfect example on how Korean society views coffee. Koreans consume coffee not only for the product itself, but because of the social connotations behind the product, as they think of coffee as a relaxing and enjoyable activity to do while socializing with their friends. Moretti's research states specifically that coffee has become such an integral part of life that it has become part of the national identity of Korea, and that coffee become a central component of people's lives, so much so that people themselves may not be fully aware of what it means to them. This last statement is particularly interesting. While we interviewed a small group of Koreans, most of them stated that they never thought about this topic. However, all of them agreed that coffee is an important part of socialization and that coffee has become part of the Korean culture. There is no denying that South Korea has assimilated coffee further up to the point where both foreign and local culture mix to create a new culture, the Korean coffee culture. As a place that sells images, Korean coffee shops play a major role in exporting Korean culture, including videos. For those who like Korean drama and movies, for example, Korean coffee shops are not just selling coffee from Korea, but are approaching place to enjoy and consume other types of Korean culture. Marketing to appear Korean actors in coffee advertisements began in 1984, and as of 2014, 30 years later, Korean wave drama actors are the mainstream within Korean coffee advertisements. For instance, Cafe Bene, a Korean coffee chain that has emerged as a coffee Korean wave in the Chinese coffee market, sponsored a number of popular Korean dramas. Cafe Bene's characteristic is a luxurious and comfortable interior using wood, attracting the attention of Chinese Hallyu viewers so that they can use the cafe as a resting place and consume Korean culture. Survey results. A total of 89 people responded to the survey. In the age group, 18 to 34-year-olds accounted for a total of 80% of the people that partook in the survey. Not only students, but also workers and job seekers responded to the survey. When asked when they drink coffee the most, about 70% of the total answered right after lunch and in the afternoon. When asked how many times a week they drink coffee, the most common answer was that they drink it every day, followed by 3 to 4 times within a week. When asked how much they spend a month to drink coffee, the most common answer was 10,000 won to 25,000 won, and also 26,000 won to 50,000 won. When asked what they do when they go to a cafe, the most common answer was to meet friends, followed by study. When asked why they drink coffee, the most common answer was to drink it to replenish energy, followed by hanging out with friends, studying, and gaining pleasure. When asked what kind of coffee they drink, Americano was the most common answer, followed by latte. When asked about the preference of franchise cafes and local cafes, a remarkable answer actually came out. Most of the foreign students preferred local cafes, and Koreans overwhelmingly preferred franchise cafes. Among them, Starbucks was a preferred franchise cafe. When asked where they usually drink their coffees or other types of beverages, the most common answer was that they drink it at cafes, followed by the home. When asked how many hours they were there when they went to a cafe, 30 minutes to 1 hour was the most common answer, followed by 1 hour to 2 hours. When asked if the cafe, which was the most important question we believe, agrees to a place where people hang out, 58 people answered yes, and 26 people answered they were not sure and thought it was different for each individual. When asked if it was a Korean or foreign culture when thinking of coffee, 61 people answered that it was a mixed culture, 19 people answered it was a Korean culture, and 5 answered that it was a foreign culture. Conclusion. As mentioned before, coffee culture was introduced to Korea around 128 years ago, so the roots of coffee culture in Korea are from foreign countries, but after this long time and change in culture, coffee culture is not simply a foreign culture anymore. As our survey results showed, out of 89 people, only 10 of them never consumed coffee regularly, which means for the most of the people in Korea, coffee is a routine. It is important to understand that coffee culture is mixed now and has affected people's lifestyles. Even one of our interviewees in his 20s said that he does not think coffee culture is foreign anymore, it has become Koreanized. It is mixed, he said specifically. Culture can be affected in different ways. In the case of Korea, coffee shows how a foreign culture can join and develop a culture in a way which is beneficial for the recipient culture, which proves the point on how cultures assimilate foreign things. As stated by Mintz, not only people more around, but so does food. Food historically has served to connect humans through food rituals and symbolism. Coffee in Korea solidifies the group's social connections. Mintz argues that ethnicity, like nationhood, is a socially constructed concept that exists in our imagination and therefore it can be changed. South Korea has experienced this with the introduction of coffee. What was once a foreign item was introduced, and rather than supplant the local, it established it. In other words, what started as a foreign culture introduced to Korea years ago has now blended in with the Korean culture itself. The views and symbolism of coffee changed up to the point where consumers no longer settle for just quality or price, but seek to be satisfied on a higher level of their cultural and emotional needs. Thus, the value of coffee consumption has evolved to place significant importance in cultural identity, as well as in the space experience that complements such value. Thank you for watching our presentation.